The Life Sciences DNA podcast is sponsored by Agilicium Labs, a collaborative space where Agilicium works with its clients ranging from early-stage biotechs to pharmaceutical giants to co-develop and incubate POCs, products, and solutions that improve patient outcomes and accelerate the development of therapies to the market. To learn how Agilicium Labs can use the power of its generative AI for life sciences analytics to help you turn your visionary ideas into realities, visit them at labs.agilicium.com. You're tuned to Life Sciences DNA with Dr. Amer Draoud. Amer, we've got Dimitrios Skaltsis on the show today. Who is Dimitrios?
Dimitrios is the CEO and co-founder of Intelligentsia AI. That's a provider of AI-powered solutions that support data-driven decision-making in drug development. Before launching the company, he spent more than a decade in various healthcare and life science-related leadership roles. He led McKinsey's new ventures for big data and AI in the pharmaceutical R&D sector, where he pioneered machine learning-enabled enterprise products in life sciences. Prior to entering the health tech industry, he began his career as an attorney. He holds his MBA from INSEAD and a law degree from the University College of London and the University of Athens.
What's Intelligentsia AI seeking to do?
Intelligentsia AI is helping biopharmaceutical companies accelerate and de-risk clinical development by applying the latest AI-based innovations, and is built on a foundation of expertly curated and harmonized clinical and biological data. So by having more accurate and AI-driven predictions around a drug receiving regulatory approval earlier in the process, companies can make better decisions when it comes to their portfolio of assets.
Now, what are you hoping to hear from him today?
I'm hoping to hear about Intelligentsia AI's unique approach to calculate which clinical trials will be successful and how that is driving biopharmaceutical companies' decisions and how it's raising the bar in the space.
Well, before we start, I just want to remind listeners that if they would like to keep up on the latest episodes of Life Sciences DNA podcast, they should hit the subscribe button. If you enjoy the content, hit the like and let us know your thoughts in the comments section. If you want to listen to this while you're on the move, an audio-only version is also available on major podcast platforms. With that, let's welcome Dimitrios to the show.
Dimitrios, thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk today about how biopharmaceutical companies make pipeline decisions about clinical trials and the potential for AI to enable faster and better decision-making about what programs to advance. So let's start with the problem the industry faces today. So it's well known that drug development is very expensive, time-sensitive, time-intensive, and with a lot of failure. So can you tell us more about this? Can you please describe the problem in more detail for us?
Amer, thank you for having me. The industry inherently is risky, and at the same time, the industry is ready for a breakthrough. So if we think about how it works, to bring a new therapy to the market, to the patients, you have to test on humans. Why? Because what works on animals, preclinical, it doesn't necessarily translate well into humans, right? And for all good reasons, it's a very highly regulated space. Now, as part of this, as you mentioned, you have high costs. So it's estimated that a new therapy costs about in the hundreds of millions or sometimes in the billions. It takes a lot of time, on average, say 10 years. And what is very crucial here is that this process is highly risky. So 85 to 9% of the programs eventually never make it to the patient. Part of this risk is inherent to the process, as we discussed. But part of this actually could be better understood and mitigated. And that's where intelligentsia comes into the picture.
Okay. So see, the thing is like, can you talk about like what are some like the biggest problems in the success of clinical trials? Like, so one you mentioned, which is yes, we work with the animal models, and then the drugs go in there, and animals are not human. I mean, their lab animals are their biology is different from that of the human, so we don't know how that success is going to translate there, right? But apart from that, what are some of the other problems you see why clinical trials fail?
So what we have seen again and again with our partners, with our users in the industry is that when you think about portfolio strategy, portfolio management, this type of decision making, often you lack workflows or you have broken workflows. There are a lot of biases, human biases that are creeping into decision making, lack of consistency across different different groups, different people, and lack of accuracy. So we've run a survey with people in portfolio strategy, in portfolio and project management, with over 100 participants. And what we've seen is that about 6% they see as the highest challenge in the space the lack of consistency.
Okay.
Now, a significant number of, again, same people, about 20-25%, they already use some AI. And that's an important shift from maybe a couple of years back. But it's also an indicator of how much more need and opportunity there is in the space to actually leverage more standardized approaches and more accurate approaches.
So when you say consistency, like that's basically consistency in decision making, which is that the same criteria do not like for starting the clinical trials, they don't get applied consistently for everything. Like, is that accurate, or what else?
I'm taking maybe a more specific view when it comes to portfolio strategy. So if you think about phase one, right? I mean, a major pharmaceutical company would have a dozen or a few dozens of candidates in phase one. It's very hard to apply some objective metrics because you don't have efficacy, you don't have safety signals. And often we're talking about novel therapies. So the biology is not fully proven, it's not fully understood. So what happens is that people apply some benchmarks, a baseline. Most of the times of very dubious quality. People complain about this. Then people would discuss with key opinion leaders in a process typically called expert elicitation. And you'd come up with a semi-quantifiable approach. Now, this approach, is not necessarily consistent from one program manager to the other, and the human intuition there changes. There's an incentive at the program level to, and not only an incentive, there's a genuine interest in actually, promoting the program you're working on. And at the portfolio level, it's very hard to qualify actually, if you're comparing apples with apples or not.
Yeah, and it's someone's baby, right? Like who are like driving the clinical trial, and then they have their personal interest in really driving that forward, no matter whether the trial is being successful or not.
As it should be. The question is how we equip those people with better tools, both at the program level and then at the portfolio level. So everybody speaks the same language. Everybody applies the same rigor in metrics.
Yeah, and what I've seen is like in terms of like this probability of success, right? Like you have for phase one certain probability of success, but that's like a big range. I mean, it could be from 50% or like from 20% to 60%, and then at least like when I've been involved in this kind of like decision making, has been okay. Well, yeah, it should be like for this therapeutic area, it should be maybe 30%, but we really have a lot of confidence in our drug, so we're gonna make it 40% instead of 30%. I mean, that's like there's no data. It's just okay. Well, I just feel that way, right? And so I'm gonna put it more. And then also about right, like, and then you're also like there's also this net present value tied to this, right? So if you increase the probability of success, then the net present value becomes positive instead of negative, and then you're going right. So like a lot of these kind of decisions I've seen in like my career, people just putting these numbers on just to get the right outcome, rather than that being based on a lot of science or a lot of the historical data.
I mean, you've been at some of the largest drug development organizations out there. I'm sure you've seen it. And as I have seen it across now multiple partners, it tends to be the norm. It's not the exception.
Okay.
Large organizations will have often quite sophisticated people and modeling for late stage, phase 3 that will apply Bayesian techniques and so on and so forth. But there is typically lack of consistency, lack of certain sophistication, especially in the earlier stages. And it's unfortunate, exactly because, as you said, the risk, the PTRS, the probability of success, fits ultimately into a broader ENPV calculation. It's along with commercial success, along with the revenue estimate, it's the hardest thing to get right. And the industry does not necessarily have the appropriate tools to make this important decision, which ultimately drives so many things in decision making in pharma. What to prioritize, what to expedite, what not, moving go-no-go decisions, investing in this major phase 3 trial, PDNL in licensing assets, acquiring assets and companies. It's inherently a risky business. That's why there are the incentives by the governments for all good reasons and purposes. And what we aim to do is address this question that goes at the core. What is the risk? And do this in a quantifiable, consistent, unbiased way.
Yeah. So see, like we talked about probability of success, or POS. You also refer to PTR as the probability of therapeutic and regulatory success. So for the audience members who are not very familiar with this concept, can you describe that a bit more? Can you like break that down for us about like how the probability of success works, or how the PTRS success works?
It's a matter of definitions always. I'll start with them. What we define in the industry as success in the PTRS is ultimately regulatory approval down the line, right? And that goes a long way if you are able, with more accuracy, to predict at phase 1, early stage, what may happen 7, 8, 10 years from now. That's major. Another type of success is transition probability. So the probability of transitioning a program from one stage, from one phase to the next. And that's also very critical because that ties to the go-no-go decisions. So we do both of those, and we work with third partners on both of those. There's also, typically when you think about probability of technical success, it's moving from one phase to the other. Probability of regulatory success is ultimately, when you have filed with the regulator, what is the likelihood, what are the chances? And then the compound metric probability of technical and regulatory success is, depending on where I stand in clinical development, phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3, what are the chances that ultimately I will get regulatory.
Okay. And so and you're then, let's say something is like in the phase 1 or so, then you have to multiply out the probabilities of successes of all these, like, the technical success in phase one, then the transition probability to phase two, then again, technical success of that, phase two, then transition to phase three, technical success of phase three, and then regulatory success, right? Like, so all of that, the multiplication. So that's why, like, I guess when you start the clinical trials, the probability of success is very low usually, right?
So you're exactly right in the way it's described. And yes, it tends to be quite low, especially for people who are not in the space. Sometimes it's shockingly low. In oncology, for instance, it's about 5%. 1 in 20 programs will eventually succeed. Now, a drug may have multiple programs, so this doesn't translate necessarily to success of the drug candidates, but translates into the programs where actually you allocate also the resources. In other therapeutic areas, it tends to be often higher. It can be 15 or 20%. So it varies. And also within oncology, for instance, different disease, or within immunology, within CNS and so on and so forth, different disease areas, different indications tend to have also different success rates.
Okay. So can you tell us more about, like, what are some of the therapeutic areas or diseases where there is, like, higher probability of success? What are some of the therapeutic areas and diseases where there's lower probability of success that you've seen, like, historically?
It depends. I mean, if we take the extremes, you have the Alzheimer's of the world. Success rate is very low. Why? Because partially, the biology is not fully understood, right? You have other disease areas where you have a successful compound, and then for instance, in oncology, you create combinational therapies.
Yeah.
And they tend to be sometimes even better than monotherapy. And cumulatively, the probability of success in this indication goes up. You have other cases where, there is some operational risk, or everyone goes after the same patient pool. It's hard to recruit patients, and that drives probability of success down. Why? Because there's so much competition. So it varies a lot. Pancreatic cancer is also another infamous.
Sorry, which one?
Pancreatic cancer, unfortunately, there's huge unmet need. And that's important also to have always in mind when people think about probability of success and making investment decisions, making resource allocation decisions, and so on and so forth. A 10% is not always same as another 10%. So if there's a 10% pancreatic cancer, for instance, on a phase one therapy, and a 10% in non-small cell lung cancer, these are not equal, because in pancreatic cancers there is higher unmet need. So maybe ultimately both programs have the same chances of getting regulatory approval down the line, but potentially a company would be more willing to take the bet on the pancreatic cancer.
Yes, because I mean it's I remember, like, it's even though the incidence of pancreatic cancer is much lower than that of lung cancer, so a lot fewer patients get it, but then still, in terms of the mortality, almost about the same number of people die from pancreatic cancer as lung cancer. I mean, it's staggering how many people die of pancreatic cancer. Yeah, and it's also interesting, Dimitrios, what you mentioned about this combination therapy having probably, like, a larger probability of success. I never thought of that before. Like, you have your new drug, which is you're combining with another drug that's already there, and yes, it has a higher probability of success, right? So, but again, it depends on what you're comparing against, right? That's also the thing.
Yeah. Exactly. Let's not generalize this. And what we have seen also. It depends on its indication. So there are indications where, combo therapies tend to have higher success rates than monotherapies, and there are other indications where it's exactly the opposite. And that's a bit of the beauty of our space, of our industry, and also of thinking about risk, probability of success. it's you have to qualify things. It's complicated, and you have to couple eventually whatever the AI in our case indicates with
Yeah.
human intuition.
Okay.
What we built is more of a support mechanism. Why?
Mhm.
Because it's such a complicated question, and humans have to come in and qualify and complement things with their own experience, with their own intuition.
Yeah. So now that we've talked about the problem here, so what can the application of AI do to address this?
Right. So as a company, we focus mostly on applying AI, or machine learning, on assessing and qualifying the probability of success. Right. We do more things, but that's the core. And we have a patent, we have IP on this, right? And we're the first company actually in the space back
Oh,
in
wow.
2017 to take a bet, if you will, that AI could actually yield some strong insights and results here.
Mhm.
Now, if you think about use case and user personas, right?
Mhm.
Typically, we work with R&D and
Mhm.
with DNL, search and evaluation, right, or
Mhm.
corporate development. So it's people who qualify either at the portfolio level or at the asset level,
Mhm.
um, and people also who in license or acquire assets.
Mhm.
So if you're a large pharma, again, you want to level set the risk assessments across your portfolio and make decisions accordingly.
Mhm.
If you're a program manager, you're interested in life cycle management, how you actually derive more value out of your asset and can risk and inform decisions like gonna go, like indication selection and so on and so forth. If
Mhm.
you're in a search and evaluate or in a BDNL group,
Mhm.
you want to identify earlier than others what may
Mhm.
be a hidden gem. You may want to qualify actually what is the risk in this ENPV calculation
Yeah.
for licensing something.
Mhm.
These are
Okay.
the main use cases.
Okay. And see AI, like there's no shortage of places where AI can be applied to improve decision making. So why did you choose, start with this drug development, and why do you think this is AI is particularly well suited for this?
I've been in the space for a bit over 15 years now, and I worked for several years as a consultant. And
Hmm.
I was with McKinsey doing a lot of work in due diligences and M&A, and then commercial strategy, portfolio strategy. And every time that an ENPV
Hmm.
calculation is involved, you have to assess probability of success. And most of the times it was an underwhelming experience, like people move in and literally they shoot in the dark because
Yes.
they don't have the appropriate tools. They don't necessarily have the support to do any better.
Hmm.
So I had this experience, and then at some point we're experimenting McKinsey with big data and AI, and there was this newly formed group, New Ventures, where I came in and led the efforts in the R&D space, pharmaceutical R&D, both
Hmm.
discovery and development.
Okay.
And at the time, we were building very interesting solutions in both discovery and development.
Hmm.
The reason eventually Intelligentsia
Hmm.
focused on this problem, and I focused on this problem, is because of its nature. It's strategic. There's a
Okay.
huge unmet need there. You see the AI drug discovery space, and there are so many wonderful companies
Hmm.
doing great things there. And I was tracking that already back then. But when you think about risk, no one had ever tried to apply AI. And that was a bridge to intelligentsia. We decided to take a bet that no one, including McKinsey at the time, was willing to take. Um, so, yeah, helping all these people out there in drug development with better tools so that they can make better decisions.
Mm-hmm.
It's a major problem. It goes into the heart of drug development.
Yeah. Intelligentsia AI has developed a portfolio optimizer. So can you talk more about what that is and how that is used?
Right. So the name of our core platform is Portfolio Optimizer. What Project does is it brings together our insights on probability of success into a software interface.
Okay.
Why a software interface? Because we think that it's important for users to have direct access to data and insights, and it's important to be able to work in a self-service mode asynchronously. Plus, it's a more scalable.
Okay.
So that's our portfolio optimizer. Core functionalities that are unique to it is that beyond our probability of success, which is industry leading, I think in many accounts, it provides also explainability. So it moves away from the notion of having a black box,
Okay.
which scares a lot of people and also is limiting in its usage. And we provide visibility into the drivers of the machine learning model we have developed, and what is important by how much, so that we can help with decision making in a more meaningful way. It goes beyond the portfolio strategy and touches also on asset strategy. How can I improve my decision making and my probability of success also at the program level?
Okay.
Beyond that, we work also in other ways. We have an insights excellence team these days. It has always been, but especially these days, it's really about insights, how you help inform decision making. So we have a specialized team that works with our partners, with our users on very specific ad hoc questions that we may get, be it a sensitivity analysis, be it going deeper into the data to answer a specific question. We provide also access sometimes to our data layer. Okay. People have come to appreciate a lot the comprehensiveness and the quality, the accuracy of our data.
Okay.
And surprisingly, to me, initially, they used in much broader use cases. A lot of users in competitive intelligence, a lot of users in trial design. So yeah, it's an array of things.
Okay. So you talked about explainability. So when you say that, you mean that like whatever you're saying in terms of the probability of success, you will your algorithm will explain why that is the case?
We back it up.
Okay.
So the algorithm is being fed with data in a structured way. So pretty much we do feature engineering, where human intuition comes in a major way, right? And yeah, we provide the parameters to the users. Say, the fact that I'll take an example that biomarkers are being included in this trial drives probability of success up or down by X%, or the fact, and there's some. What I always discuss with our users, there are inherent signals and there are external signals. It's important to take into account both. Inherent signals could be the efficacy, right? Once you have some efficacy, then it's easier to directionally review the probability of success. There are also external signals. For instance, the fact that you may be recruiting more patients than you were planning to initially. It's something that it means that something as a user that you may not have published to the world, but we're picking it up. So for accuracy, it's important. It may be less actionable than a feature about which endpoints are being used at a phase 3. but it's still very important for the accuracy of the ultimate prediction.
Mhm. Now, I mean, the interesting thing about AI is that you have to have really good quality data and a lot of data. So can you tell us about what is the range of like data and the sources of data that are driving this?
Yeah, gladly too. And again, we have IP over this, so it's protected and it's out there in the world to some extent.
So yeah, I mean, whatever you can share publicly, right? About that, yeah.
It's all about data at the end of the day, or it's most about data. A lot of talk about AI, even the ChatGPT models these days. So many people complain about hallucinations and so on and so forth. Why? It largely depends on not only how you train the model, but what data you feed the model with. So Intelligentsia, we have purpose-built data to feed the models, and we have invested a lot into our data from day one. Why? I'll discuss what data we have and why our data are better than other data. I'll start with the latter. So we have harmonized data, which is very important. There's a lot of data out there, but they don't speak with each other necessarily. So what we've done is we've defined ontologies that help us pretty much bring dictionaries that help us bring data together in a harmonized way. And then we have a lot of automate data pipelines that help ensure timeliness. And then we have human in the loop. We have experts who add curation layers to the QCs that we already do in an automated way. That ensures quality. Now, that goes, all these goes a long way, and it's hard to get right. So that's the foundation of this. Now, what type of data? Biology, drug and disease biology, clinical outcomes, if any.
Okay.
Sometimes they're available, sometimes not, but efficacy and safety in a very painstakingly detailed way. Clinical trial design, setup, execution, like what patient populations, which endpoints, and so on and so forth. And lastly, regulatory data. Okay, it's a highly regulated space. There are signals in what regulators are saying in regulatory paths and so on.
Okay. And what's been done to train and validate the portfolio optimizer so you can predict this probability of success with very high accuracy?
So we claim we have the highest accuracy in the space. I would say it's appropriate also to claim that, as far as I know, we're the only ones who have been prospectively validating our results in a statistically significant way.
Oh, wow.
In a repeatable way. So, as examples, and we published recently an article at Fierce Pharma that discussed exactly this. We provide some predictions in the earlier days of the company, back in late 2019, on NSCLC and melanoma, working with a large pharma. We have been tracking now monitoring those decisions. They have been tracking out quite well over time. They have improved. Our current predictions are better, sometimes significantly better. But even then, we're able to predict novel therapies quite accurately. And that was for early stage development, phase 1 and phase 2. That's one example. What is a more interesting example to me is the following. Again, discussed in this article. There's a thesis that the main arbitrage when you think about investing in a biotech company is risk.
Yes.
Right? And the market value, the stock price is driven mostly by how the market understand risk. So what we've done is we said, okay, we have an Intelligentsia company score based on risk. What if we force rank the companies early stage biotech, publicly traded, and what if we track, monitor how the stock market moves for these companies. We have done extensive back testing on this. Last year, we decided to do prospective validation. So April 2023, we said, we look at companies with a market cap between 100 million and 1 billion that are in oncology and I&I, immunology, inflammation. And let's pick the top, I think 20%, right? So what we saw a year later, and we published on this, is that, these top companies, they had market returns of 6% on aggregate, where the remaining companies in that basket, they had, and the basket was about 150 companies. The remaining companies had about 15%. So the high companies were beating them. And also the ETF in the space, XPI, are also about 15 to 20%. So that's promising. What we also observed is that out of the top 10 companies in that portfolio, the top 3 of them got acquired recently. In the meantime, we had identified those companies early on, and we have identified them with what I call the most sophisticated, unsophisticated way, right? If you're a practitioner, if you're an investor in a hedge fund, if you're a practitioner in BDNL, search and evaluate, you're very sophisticated and you look at an array of things, as you should, right? We don't do this, but what we do extremely well is assessing risk. And because risk is such an important parameter in ENPV, it's a very nice alternative, complementary approach to identifying opportunities. And we do increasingly work in that space, including the financial market, like research analysts, hedge funds. It's a very interesting use case. But to your original question, there's a lot of AI out there. The important thing is how well validated it is. And it no longer cuts the mark when people come and say, yes, we have an 80% AUC and validated retrospectively in this test set. It's a good starting point. It's a necessary starting point. But what we have observed in the industry with our partners is that ultimately people ask for actual real life validation.
Yeah. That's very interesting, and I can see like the big use case with like these really important financial decisions, right? Like where all of this information in terms of a BDNL, like the business development licensing, that's where like this can play really a huge role. And for those in the audience not familiar with like this net present value, right? This is where basically, we're doing this calculation about what is going to be the cost, what is going to be the revenue, and what is going to be the success of getting that revenue, right? And so you're putting all of that together. If the net present value is positive or it's like very highly positive, that's when you're making the decision to do the trial or to buy the company that has the product. Whereas if it's negative, then you're saying, no, this is not a good business decision. So having the right inputs into this model is so critical to make these large financial decisions. Yeah, exactly. And how the one question I have here is that there has been a lot of talk about low probability of success or so. In your experience, have you seen clinical trials getting better probability of success over, let's say, last couple of years compared to 10 years ago? Have you kind of seen the shift in pharma or not really? Is that just talk still?
In my experience on aggregate, I think it does not apply. Okay. We have the ability to analyze probability of success by time windows. So we track things. And it's an interesting exercise, but in my experience, it may apply in some cases, but in many others, it doesn't apply. What has been my experience, though, is that Exactly, because there's a declining R&D productivity in the space. It's a burning platform and has been declining for the last many years. There's an increased emphasis and attention internally, especially in large pharma, but also mid-cap and often biotech, on how to make better decisions, how to improve, for instance, the success rate from phase 2 to phase 3, from phase 3 to approval, and so on and so forth. Sometimes earlier, it depends on the company. There's an increased emphasis. I think this will ultimately lead to an improved overall clinical development success rates, which can be huge for the patients primarily, and for the industry, which still spends hundreds of billions every year in R&D and hundreds of billions in BD&A. And the answer ultimately is better decision making, which will be a combination, in my experience already, with large pharma, but also mid-cap and biotech. But mostly with large pharma is a combination of all the great investments I do internally on better data, better workflows, better data science. So some of the pharmaceuticals out there do amazing things, coupled also with a triangulated approach, with specialized decision support systems, such as Intelligentsia. Not the only one. I mean, across the value chain, there are many of those. I call them gem companies. They specialize on something that do it really well, and they have outsized impact.
Okay. Now, the Intelligentsia AI operates with like this software as a service model. So, who in a biopharmaceutical company would use Portfolio Optimizer, and do they need any specialized training to do that?
Yeah, it's portfolio strategy teams, it's program management teams, it's search and evaluate, BD&L. We see a lot of CI, increasingly competitive intelligence. Do they need specialized training? We always make sure we provide some hand-holding, appropriate onboarding. It's needed. Again, it's largely a technical platform. We've gone a long way to have a user-friendly platform, and we get a lot of compliments for that.
Great.
But yeah, we do provide onboarding, we do provide hand-holding on questions. And ultimately, there are users who, get it right away, and there are users who may go deeper in some of the specifics of the functionalities of the platform, or they may be more inquisitive on certain things, and we provide that support.
I thought maybe you could talk about the work you did with ZS Associates as an example of how this can be applied in the real world. So can you talk about what ZS was trying to do and how they use your technology and what the result was for that?
Yeah, I'll take it as a broader question of, give us specific use cases, right? With ZS, we have a partnership where, sometimes we do work together, and quite often we don't, right? But it's been a great partnership now for the last 3 years, and I expect to continue for a longer time, for another 3 years plus. Now, an example that I always like to highlight when it comes to use case is the following. And it goes back to the discussion we had about workflows and consistency and so on and so forth. We have been working now for a couple of years with a large pharma. They trusted us, they started using us, but initially we're not part of their workflows. It was like something optional, complementary. And they had this phase 3 trial where they were already spending a lot of money enrolling patients and so forth. They got the interim results, and they were not good. And what they observed is that internally they had assigned a probability of success of over 40%, where in Intelligentsia AI we're providing about 10%, which is very low for a phase 3, by the way. It's significantly lower than the historical average. So that actually led to a workflow update where now they have to triangulate when there's a discrepancy. When things are consistent, it's fine. When there's a discrepancy, there's an internal dialogue. It
Sure.
instigates internal
Yeah.
discussion, and that has been very helpful to
Yes.
this organization because it doesn't really add any burden. It only makes them smarter in the case where they have to pressure test
hmm
things
hmm
more. Sometimes they learn things, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they derive or they arrive at a different decision making,
hmm
sometimes they don't. But it has been enriching their process and
hmm
making them smarter.
Great, great. Now, the company also has this another product, the clinical development insights, that's in beta. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Absolutely. Goes into I'll approach in two directions. The one is Portfolio Optimizer is a very advanced AI
hmm
platform. Clinical Program Insights so far is mostly descriptive
Okay.
analytics. There is a beauty in simplicity. And if you think about it, most people in the space actually what they lack is not the over sophisticated system. Often they lack basic systems. In this case, what competitive in what the clinical development insights module is highly curated data where we provide insights, we analyze and
hmm
provide insights, and over time we'll have
hmm
multiple modules. The first module is the good old school
hmm
baseline on historical likelihood of approval, which unfortunately the industry gets suboptimal support right now, and there's complaints about that. So if you want to have a baseline for the likelihood
hmm
of success for, let's say, NSCLC with some specific parameters, and let's say primary
hmm
endpoint met
hmm
versus not, there is no solution right now for this. There are no benchmarks that are
hmm
granular enough. There are no benchmarks that have good enough quality of data.
Okay.
That's the gap that we're
hmm
filling in here, and we go a step further where we say path to path analysis. When you want to design create your clinical
hmm
development plan and say, okay, I'm moving from phase 1 to phase 3. It
Okay.
happens sometimes. Or I'm moving directly to phase 2
Yes.
and
Yes.
skipping a phase 1, and so on and so forth. We provide insights into how those programs, how those
Okay.
paths have fared
Okay.
over time. So we help with decision
Okay.
making there. Over time, we'll be augmenting these with insights into clinical outcomes and trial design and endpoints and all those crucial parameters for appropriate clinical development decision making. The aim is to support a broader group of people, including people who do the trial design. And as I mentioned, we do more and more working with competitive
hmm
intelligence, so that's very
hmm
useful to them.
But it's what you talked about today, right? This is getting to like really the crux of drug development, right? And if we can have better decisions around what clinical trials to do, if we can, and set up the clinical trials in the right way, that will help tremendously in terms of getting the right drugs out for the patients in a much faster and more efficient manner. And that, I think that would be amazing to have that. So really appreciate that. Dimitrios Kaltsas, co-founder and CEO of Intelligentsia AI. Dimitrios, thank you for your time today.
Omer, thank you. Love discussing with you. Thank you
Great.
for inviting me.
Well, Emmer, what did you think?
Yeah, it's a fascinating area, the probability of success, and calculating that and making decisions around that, right? So I definitely have thought that there is a big unmet need in this area because I mean I've worked in with many of my companies where we needed to make the decisions around the clinical trials and around the portfolio, and then a lot of times we just didn't have the right data.
Well, as someone who's lived in this space, I've never met a pharmaceutical company that didn't describe itself as being science driven and data driven.
Mhm.
It's still a human enterprise, and other issues have a way of coloring decision making. What's the potential for AI to make decision making more rigorous?
Yeah, so in this aspect, right, when you think about the probability of success for a clinical trial, that's what do you base it on? I mean, you base it on a similar type of in this specific therapeutic area, in this specific disease. You look at the historical information, right? Like what are the historical trials? What has been their success rate? But then you're also looking at the biology of this. I mean, some points that Demetrius brought up are like even like, are you going to get enough patients to recruit, right? All of these, like there are a lot of there's the scientific kind of questions. There are some of these more like practical kind of questions. All of these are going into the kind of like determination of what is the probability of success. And of course, you don't know because human biology is so difficult to really understand. We don't understand it very well even now, although we have made tremendous progress in the last 70 years or so. But still, it's still you don't know. And so when you think about it, well, the probability of success could be 20%, it could be 40%, it could be 50%. You really don't know. So there's a lot of kind of leeway in terms of what is it that you want to put in your model when you if you're like trying to see if you should do this clinical trial, right, and what the overall in the end what the whether this is going to be successful or not. So because you have such a large window of which you can put in the probability of success, it becomes quite a bit subjective rather than objective. And that's why I believe that with AI, it will be very beneficial because AI is not going to have any, I mean, of course, it's going to be looking at the data in a very like nonchalant manner and saying, okay, well, this is what it is. Like there should not be like much about okay well I just think this is a great compound, that's why we should do it. I mean I've seen that a lot where people increase the probability of success because they think yeah that was historical, but I really think this is a fantastic compound, we should put more probability of success for that. But I'm pretty sure like for all the other trials that failed, people said the same thing. I mean, people are doing the trial because they are so excited about this, right? So we need to take those kind of irrationality out of the decision making here. And I think AI would be really good for that.
Well, it does seem to be a place where AI could make a big impact, but as with other AI cases, it comes back to having the right data. It's not just internal data about a program, but also external data.
Yeah.
Do drug makers have access to the right data to de-risk these decisions?
So the drug makers usually may not have so much access to all this. Also, this is very time consuming because in a particular disease area that you're looking at a bunch of in a large number of historical clinical trials. What exactly happened with them? What were the compounds? And then your company, a lot of other companies, what happened in terms of regulation? How does the disease make them look like? So for just one clinical trial to do so much data exploration and data analysis is not a very easy task. And so what I like about what Intelligentsia AI is doing is that they're doing that across the board, but then all the data they're putting together, that can be actually applied by a lot of pharmaceutical companies who are in the same area, right? So it could even, you can think about like, it could be even a pre-competitive space, right? Because you're basically looking at, okay, well, what happened? How's the biology around this? Well, maybe not about the specific clinical candidate, but other than that, like what happened historically is the same across the board, right? So there is a lot of benefit in terms of like putting all that together for multiple companies, and just one single pharma company doing that for every single clinical trial is a lot of work. So people, I don't think people have the resources to actually do like very, very comprehensive analysis for this.
If we do get to a point where AI is effective at informing these kinds of pipeline decisions, is there some risk that we end up excluding or not pursuing novel therapies that don't fit the AI algorithm?
There definitely is a risk around that. But although I would say that you can maybe account for that, right? Like that novelty of this, and there's always a chance that something for which you didn't have a whole lot of data, and then you adjusted for that, right? But I think that risk is still there right now. I mean, I think right now the way I've seen the decision making around that, there's a long way. We can improve a lot on that. So I would say at this point, I'm not worried about like the AI maybe missing maybe like a trial there. I would say right now, if AI can make the decision making consistent, we will see a big benefit to the patients because of that, right? Because then the right clinical trials are being selected, and they're running efficiently, and so we have a higher probability of getting the right drugs on the market for the patients earlier, right? So I would say I see much more benefit for AI right now rather than the risk of using AI here. And also, as I said, like there's explainability, right? Like, so why was the probability of success 23% and not 30%? Like they're trying to explain that, right? And that's something that you as the human clinical decision maker, you can look at that and see if that makes sense or not, right? I mean, and then you can make your own decision about it.
Well, it's a compelling application. Until next time.
Thank you, Danny.
Thanks again to our sponsor, Agilicium Labs. Life Sciences DNA is a bi-monthly podcast produced by the Levine Media Group with production support from Fullview Media. Be sure to follow us on your preferred podcast platform. Music for this podcast is provided courtesy of the Jonah Levine Collective. We'd love to hear from you. Pop us a note at danny@levinemediagroup.com. For Life Sciences DNA and Dr. Amar Drowad, I'm Daniel Levine. Thanks for joining us.